Hey there, everyone. I'm Samuel Johnson, and welcome to the MCU Perspectives. And yes, this is not the same shirt I wore in the prologue. Short story: I had to go mow the lawn halfway through watching the movie, and I got really sweaty. I had to change out shirts. So yeah, that's a thing. It was worth acknowledging, I suppose. No, it wasn't. It was not worth acknowledging. That was a waste of time. But anyway, today we are going to be discussing the very first movie to be released as part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Iron Man. Now, before I actually start talking about the movie, I want to get into my personal history with Iron Man prior to seeing it. Back when and I mean that by when I first saw it, not right now. Back in the day, when I was a kid, I only knew about a handful of superheroes, and the ones I did know were the only ones I cared about. If I was aware of other superheroes, via connection to the heroes that I knew. And for me, those heroes that I enjoyed were people like Spider-Man or the Incredible Hulk, Batman, Superman, etc. All of those were superheroes that I personally knew about, and likewise, other superhero. The only way I knew about other superheroes was via them. Yes, I did know about more that I paid attention to. It was because of the movies that were released at the time. But again, it was mostly just in conjunction with those heroes, nothing else. I didn't really go into. I wasn't interested for some of the heroes. I wasn't interested in the lore about them until certain events happened, and Iron Man, unfortunately, was one of those heroes that I was aware of, but didn't really put any major stock in. However, my first major exposure to Iron Man, and like I said, like with other superheroes, I learned more about him via his connection to other heroes. In this case, I learned more about Iron Man thanks to Spider-Man. In this case, my first real exposure to Iron Man was his inclusion in the Spider-Man animated series, specifically when he took part in the Venom saga. I got that DVD I got a DVD for that when I was a kid, because when I was a kid, and I still do. Venom was one of my favorite supervillains and still is to this day, but that's another villain. But anyway, so when Iron Man appeared in that arc, I knew he was a guy in a cool metal suit, but that's all I knew about him. I didn't know who he was under the mask. I didn't know his backstory. I knew next to nothing about Iron Man until until Ultimate Avengers. When I first saw that movie, I still only knew the most bare stuff about Iron Man. So so I didn't even know who he was until the scene in Ultimate Avengers where he got unmasked, and yeah, I like that. So yeah, but even after that, the closest exposure I had to more of his lore was through the Invincible Iron Man animated movie, which is honestly not that great of a movie. It's not awful, but it's not that great, if I'm being completely honest. So yeah, I only knew some stuff. I knew somewhat of his backstory, how he had something in his chest that kept him alive, how he got it after being attacked, how he got it after being attacked in a war caravan, how that it was this theory, how he initially created the suit, etc. I knew about all that. I knew some of that, but beyond that, his lore, his friends beyond War Machine, I knew nothing about. Again, went in. So yeah, Iron Man was not really something I put much stock into. Well, again, I also saw them through the animated series, so that was nice because they were running reruns of that on Jetix at the time. So I watched that and I thought it was cool. Definitely thought season 2 was better than season 1, but that's the general consensus for everybody. So when I went into this movie, I just thought it was gonna be like a cool, fun superhero thing because at that point I was used to all the other superhero movies coming out, and back when I first saw this movie, I was in a phase that I like to call my... Well, actually, you know what? I have no name for it. I was in denial with movies, so to speak. Even when a film sucked, I had to like it. So every superhero film I saw prior to this, even when it was bad, I still kind of liked. And pretty much, if you said, "Oh, it's a superhero," you had me sold. I would want to see it. And the only reason, and though there would usually be a part, though for some films there would be a part of mine that said no, thank you. So when they made an Iron Man movie, I thought, oh, cool, another superhero movie. I want to see it. And I was just, and again, I knew that I thought it was just Marvel trying to get some more of their superheroes into movies because they had the Spider-Man trilogy, they had Fantastic Four out. I just saw this as like just another superhero movie, not the beginning of anything, not the beginning of anything major. I just thought it would be like a cool superhero movie with some neat little references here and there to the comics. But the film ultimately was a huge success, and it was the start of what is of a cinematic universe that's still going strong after 11 plus years. So, is it still good? Well, first let's try to get into the plot, and I want to let you know right now. I have my phone here right now. That's my puppy. My puppy's the screensaver. You don't notice that because of the identification, but here's my puppy. Sorry, I'm getting sidetracked again, but. That's the reason I have my phone. My phone here has some notes that I took on the movie. I mostly just took plot notes that I could keep track of certain things that I wanted to remember about this film. So I may occasionally pull this up and look at my notes. So just giving you a heads up there. But anyway, the main character of the movie is Tony Stark, a billionaire playboy weapons dealer. He pretty much the company he runs a company called Stark Industries, a company that was started by his father Howard Stark. Tony is a brilliant mind. Ever since he was a kid, he has been a technological genius. At 4 years, he built his own engine at 6 years old. He built his own mainframe when he was 4, and at the age of 21, he became the CEO of Stark Enterprises. Before that, it was run by a man named Obadiah Stane, who was personal friends with his father, and Stane eventually took over the company when his parents died in a car crash. Now Tony's in charge, and Stane's kind of like his business partner, so to speak. But Tony is kind of a problem child, so to speak. Despite his vast intellect and all his talent, he is a spoiled, rotten, egotistical douchebag. In the beginning of the movie, they're holding an award ceremony they're holding some kind of award ceremony that Tony's won, and they got his friend Rhodey. They got his friend Rhodey to give him the award, but unfortunately Tony isn't there. Stane instead takes on his behalf. And it turns out that the reason Tony missed it was because, 1, he didn't keep track of time, and 2, he was off gambling. So as such, he completely missed it, and by the time he learns that he actually won, and so Rhodey has to come to his table and give him his trophy, and he clearly doesn't give a crap about it. Once he gets it, he admires it for like a few seconds, and then hands it to some girl at the table with him. And then after he loses the game he was playing, he just gives the trophy to a random stranger and walks off. So he clearly does not give a damn about it. And on top of that, when he leaves the casino, a female reporter comes out and wants to try and have a word with him, and she clearly is not on his side. She wants to know about the dirt. She wants to ask him some very personal questions, and she doesn't buy his whole professionalism act, and he ends up seducing her and sleeping with her that night. But on top of that, the next day he ends up going off to Afghanistan. The reason being because he's developed a new weapon that he wants to show off. A weapon that's supposed to be like the coup de grace of weapons, the big gun, the war finisher. Essentially, I suppose you can call it a super missile called the Jericho, which, when shot in the air, will release several rockets that span over several miles of territory, and would cause a shockwave that would spread out across an entire area. Pretty much, it's, as Tony Stark describes it, it's essentially a one-shot weapon. A weapon that you only need to fight. That if you want your enemies to eventually just give up right away, just shoot it once and boom. And it's a rousing success, as when Tony gets to Afghanistan, he shows it off, and it seems to work. But as Tony, however, as Tony is getting into a Humvee and he is being driven off to another location, the Humvee is attacked. His personal guard ends up going out to try and find out whoever is attacking, but first off, the first Humvee that was in, because there were two of them, Tony in the second one, then the first one, that one gets blown up but good with all the soldiers in it dying, and everyone that was in Tony's Humvee gets it. All the soldiers that were in Tony's Humvee come out and start trying to find what's going on, and all of them are just gunned down immediately. Tony, in a panic, tries to get out, and he does manage to crawl a safe distance away until a weapon hits, until a miniature rocket is blasted in his location, and it turns out it has Stark Industries' name written on it, and it explodes right in Tony's face. And while Tony survives, he ends up suffering a lot of injuries as his suit starts turning red with blood, and he rips it open. He's got a Kevlar vest underneath, and whatever it is, it's just pretty much gotten into his heart, and he passes out. And after that, the next time you see him, he's being used in one of those terrorist videos where they have a hostage, and they tear a bag off his head to reveal who he is. And well, I'm kind of paraphrasing here because this scene actually happened in the beginning of the movie. Then they cut to the award ceremony, but after that, but I guess in chronological term events, the next time you see him, he's on an operating table and something's being put into him. And by the time he wakes up, he finds himself in a cave with just heavy injuries. And by him, there's a doctor. Hold on a second. I'm going to look up his name because I typed it out when I heard his name. The doctor's name is Jensen. I apologize if I mispronounced that. A doctor who was also kidnapped by, like, Tony. It turns out that when Tony got hit by the rocket, some of the shrapnel got embedded in his chest. And while Dr. Jensen, as I'm just gonna say, was able to get most of the shrapnel out, unfortunately, some of it is still embedded in Tony's heart, and he wasn't able to get that out. So the best way to keep Tony alive was by building a small electromagnet that he put in his chest, which keeps the shrapnel from entering his bloodstream, and the only thing powering it is a car battery that's hooked up to it. Pretty much meaning that if Tony takes this thing off, he's gonna die. However, before Tony can ask some more questions, the people holding them captive, the terrorists that captured them, come in, and we learn that they're a group called the Ten Rings, a terrorist cell in the mountains who we learn have been using Stark weaponry. And the reason they've captured Tony Stark is because they are aware of the Jericho missile, and they want one. They pretty much want Tony to build. They pretty much have everything that Tony can use to build a Jericho missile, including a lot of his tech, which Tony is horrified to see. But and so what they want to do is that they want the biggest gun in the house. They want the Jericho for themselves, and since they have Tony right here, they want him to build one for him. And while Tony does initially refuse, pretty much eventually, after a bout of waterboarding and realizing just kind of what the situation he and Jensen are in, he realizes that he has no choice. And while the leader of the Ten Rings, or at least the representative, because we learn there's someone higher up than him, because we see a guy that's higher up than him. And don't ask me, and I don't know his name. I think it was said like once. But I didn't catch it, and I didn't think it was worth remembering since he's ultimately not the big bad. Spoilers. But Tony eventually realizes that the best way to stay alive, at least for now, is to at least just say he's building the Jericho missile, though he knows that the instant he builds it, he and Jensen are pretty much... So, Tony starts trying to organize everything into a little lab so that he can use to build something, but he lets Jensen in on that he's not that he only wants these people to think he's building the Jericho missile. Instead, he's realizing that after seeing everything here, he realizes that they need to find a way out of here with their lives. Because even if they build this, they're still kind of screwed. So the first thing he does, though, is that he builds a new power source for the electromagnet for his chest plate, as we'll call it, as he creates something called an arc reactor. If that's a real thing, someone tell me. I don't think it is. I think it's a creation for this movie, but pretty much the arc. Tony has like a larger one back at home that he uses to power his man. He uses to provide power to his mansion. I think a few other buildings in his area. But what he does is that with his capabilities, he manages to create a mini version and puts it in his chest plate, thus eliminating the need for a car battery. While Jensen is impressed because this could pretty much provide him with limitless power for, as he says, 50 lifetimes, Tony's actually got something bigger in mind. As he shows Jensen some specs for something else, not a missile, a suit, essentially a suit of, well, iron, so to speak. As such, over the next few weeks, because they do state that Tony is stuck with these guys for like 3 months. Tony and Jensen work in tandem trying to create the Jericho missile. They are being watched by the terrorists, and thankfully the terrorists don't know all the specs about what they're doing, so while they do question some things, they still think that at the end of the day Tony's still working on the Jericho missile. In the meantime, Tony and Jensen are bonding, and Jensen mentions that. And so when Tony asks Jensen if he has any family, he tells him yes, and that he'll eventually be seeing them once this is all over, which is pretty much a giveaway that his parents are dead that his family's dead if you ask me. But pretty much, eventually though, the terrorists are realizing that at least the leader of the Ten Rings knows that something's going on. Eventually, he catches on that whatever Tony and Jensen are doing, it's not building a Jericho missile like he wants. As such, he goes to their lab, so to speak, and starts threatening Jensen, telling him he wants to know what it is, and he almost kills it, and he's getting ready, but Jensen keeps telling them they're building the Jericho, but Tony manages to stop this guy from killing Jensen by saying that he needs him, he's his assistant, he's vital to the work. And so while he lets him live, he puts a final cap on everything, saying that he wants his Jericho by the next day. And so Tony and Jensen realize they have to finish work on this suit as quickly as possible if they want to live. So they begin working on it as fast as they can through the rest of the night. And by the next day, they finally have the suit built. And they manage to get Tony inside it. The representatives of the Ten Rings are watching this, and when they don't see Tony, because they don't want them seeing the suit, so they put it in this off way in an area that can't be seen via the cameras. And since Tony's in it, they can't find him. They try to break into the room, but thankfully they've rigged the room with explosives to keep them at bay. So once they try getting in, it blows them and sends them back. In the meantime, they have to get the system started in the suit, so they try getting it ready. But Jensen realizes that with the amount of time, with all the people that are out there, and how much time it will take to get the suit up and running, they're not going to be able to have enough time. So Jensen grabs a gun and runs out to try and cause a distraction, which unfortunately leads to him getting shot. However, it does manage to pay off in the end as the suit gets started up, and so by the time the Ten Rings a few of the members of the Ten Rings get into the room, Tony's got the suit up and running, and he just starts beating the crap out of them. They keep shooting at him, but the bullets keep bouncing off his armor. And as he keeps going out, pretty much, it's actually a really cool scene, as you see him in this big gray suit of armor. The only thing that's glowing is the chest and the eyes. I don't even think the eyes glow. I could be wrong. I think that's just light playing on me. I know the chest glue because of the arc reactor, but otherwise, just seeing him just going around beating the crap out of everybody, it's a really nice scene. And just seeing these guys just seeing these terrorists just freaking out as the bullets do nothing, and he just keeps shooting. It's actually really cool, though. I think they probably kill him if they aim for the eyes or mouth. But honestly, those are small targets anyway. And when this thing's charging at you, maybe you probably wouldn't have a good aim, especially when this thing is getting closer. But pretty much, he is just plowing right through them, and to the point where he runs into the leader again. And the leader does try hitting him with a rocket, but in response, Tony shoots at him and causes a bit of the cave rock to fall on him, as well as causing a bit of weaponry to explode. Doesn't kill him, but it does leave a burn mark. But however, after he does this, Tony finds Jensen on the ground. Tony finds Jensen, who's bleeding out and dying, and Tony winds up trying to bring him with him, but Jensen tells him that his family is dead, and so he says that this is what he wanted, and this was his plan all along. He knew he was going to die anyway, but he wants Tony, but he wanted to save Tony, but he wanted to help save Tony. As such, Tony walks out in his new suit. And pretty much, the suit is also equipped with flamethrowers, so after the remaining members of the Ten Rings just shoot at Tony and it does nothing, he just ignites the flamethrowers and starts burning through all their weapon caches, pretty much destroying as much of their stuff as he can. We learn later that he doesn't destroy everything, but he does destroy a significant amount, and then he blasts off and he uses some thrusters that he puts in the suit to fly a safe distance away before those shut down, and he crashes, pretty much just totaling the suit. But Tony's alive, so it's a win-win either way. And thankfully, while Tony does manage to get away from the crash site, eventually a couple helicopters spot him escaping, and they come down and Rhodey's on board. He's on board one of them, and so they manage to get him back to the U.S. of A. Just not in tip-top shape, because you see he's still sporting some injuries, and he's still kind of got some aftershock, but otherwise he's okay, and they manage to get him into a limo, and his secretary, Pepper Potts, is there. I forgot to mention her, I probably should have. And they initially want to get him to a hospital, but Tony says no, he wants to first get a cheeseburger, and then he wants a press conference. So they stop at Burger King off screen, and he gets his cheeseburger. And they go to and of course the press conference is being held, and there's Obadiah there to meet and greet him, who seems happy enough that Tony's still in one piece, though he thought he'd go to the hospital first. But Tony, when he gets to the press conference, also kind of drops a bombshell, as he talks about how while he was held by the Ten Rings, he saw these weapons that he built being used to hurt people and just cause major harm, hurting innocents, the people he wanted to protect. And he realizes that, and he tells everybody that he no longer believes that he should suffer zero accountability for making these weapons when they're being used to harm innocents. And so he thinks that for the betterment of everybody, he says that Stark Industries is no longer going to be making weapons, which does get a giant uproar from the press, though Stain, Pepper, and eventually his limo driver, Happy Hogan, though they never say his full name. In this one, they just call him Hogan. They eventually manage to get him off stage. And yeah, it does cause a major backlash from everybody. However, hold on a second, take a look at notes. Sorry. That didn't really help either way. But pretty much, even with all this said and done, Tony still wants to do something. Because he did say exactly what he meant, and people are still and pretty much it is causing an uproar, because Stark Industries' main line of financing is through their weapons contracts, and now with them being shut down, they don't know what they're gonna do. And it gets even worse when Stain tells Tony that they need, and it kind of gets he pretty much is going through so much crap, and it eventually comes to a head. Actually, it doesn't really come to a head, as during the height of all this, he calls Pepper down to his personal lab, because he's got one underground, as he swaps out as he wants her to help him swap out his arc reactor for a much more improved one. Well, Pepper does, and they do manage to get it out, and Pepper takes the old one and puts it in a museum case, even though Tony told her to throw it away. But after this, he meets up with Stain at the main arc reactor, the one that he says is powering everything. And while Stain still is questioning Tony about why he's even doing this at all, to which Tony thinks that they should probably redirect their funding towards this. And Stain thinks it's a load, that the arc reactor was just a publicity stunt that they used to shut up the hippies. But Tony is able to convince him by showing him the one in his chest and how it's keeping him alive. And immediately Stain kind of changes his tune and thinking that maybe they could use this for something, though Tony's a little hesitant to share this with him. That he wants that to stay with him, especially when later on Stain comes back from a board meeting with a from a board meeting with a from the head of a board meeting with the board of directors of Stark Industries, and he says that they kind of wanted to phase Tony out, however, Tony is still steadfast, and he immediately starts and while he's at home, he immediately starts getting ready to build a Mark II version of the suit. This one being more of the traditional Iron Man suit that you're familiar with, except in this case it's gray and so forth. Pretty much, or I think it's silver. I don't know. It's some kind of. It's either way. It's not as. It's the same. It's initial design, but none of the color scheme. And we kind of get through it, and we kind of go through a nice little testing phase as he's going through all these various knickknacks and various other functions to try and get it right, like flight function. Like he tries 10%, it blasts him into a wall. He tries to shoot off the pulsar from his arm, and it just sends him flying back. It's actually it's a nice little amusing scene. But while this is going on, we see that we see members of back in Afghanistan, back in the Middle East or Afghanistan or wherever. The turns of the Ten Rings are actually searching for what's left of Tony's initial suit, and we even see, and like I said, the guy who we saw earlier, the guy who's the head, he's alive with the burn mark, but they eventually manage to find the suit and dig it up. However, as Tony continues testing this new suit, he starts going through he goes through various other things, trying them out at 1%, or trying to actually, trying the flight systems at 1%, trying to float around his lab until he eventually crashes. Just all this little stuff, and just trying to improve upon it. Even trying out the flight systems outside, and it's a really fun scene when you see him flying around in this new suit, and it's very cool. You see all these awesome sights. Though it eventually comes to a head when he tries going higher than any other weapons that's possible, and his suit ends up freezing. He does manage to survive by not getting the ice off with some ejectors on his suit, and he does manage to stop himself from crashing. Though when he tries landing, he instead just falls right through his ceiling and back into the garage, where an arm douses him with some extinguisher, with that stuff that you find in fire extinguisher. Sorry, I don't know that word. I don't know what it is. But as Tony is working on this, he sees a TV broadcast for a charity drive that his company is hosting, and Tony finds that he wasn't invited. And I think part of the reason is because Stain told him not. It's because Stain told him to lay low, because with all the flack that he got for shutting down the Stark Weapons Division, pretty much he's kind of a liability, so to speak. But Tony decides that he's going to crash his own party anyway, as he tells his AI to take the initial design, make some improvements, and then change the color so that it's yellow and change the design. It's initially yellow, but then he mixes in some red and makes it look like what we're used to from Iron Man. And before we go any further, I want to bring something up that I really should have brought up in the prologue. The AI for Tony's AI is an AI called Jarvis. Now, if I don't bring this up, I think someone else will. In the comics, Jarvis was not an AI. He was the personal butler to Stark and, by extension, the Avengers. And honestly, I don't mind that he's an AI, but the only reason I bring it up is because I want to bring something up that, again, I should have brought up in the prologue. This is not the first time that the movies change things about certain things, about the characters. Like, the movies changed a few things change a few things here and there, whether it's to get better, to ensure the movie does well in certain countries, or just to be more progressive, or just trying to, or just changing something that really just because it fits, or just because it fits into the story they want to do, or even if they just don't know, even if they just didn't want to make a change. I'm not gonna lie, part of the but honestly, I'm not gonna discuss those changes that much. I will discuss. Here's the thing: unless I think the change is too big from what was originally in the comics, or something that I think was a really bad direction to put it in, I am not gonna bring it up. If you ask me, I don't care about these changes. I do not give a dang that the ancient one is now a young woman instead of an old man in a beard, or that Flash Thompson is no longer a white guy with blonde hair. I, honest to God, could care less. I'm only here to discuss these movies by their own merits, and if the changes I think fit into the movie or aren't too outrageous, I'm okay. Then I'll still be okay with it as long as it's written well. I'm okay with it. Now I'm not gonna just let that go for everything in these films, because there are a few things that kind of get under my skin. It's not enough to make me hate them, but it's enough for me to at least mention. So I'm not so while there are going to be some, but at the end of the day, while there are going to be some things that I will call out because I think that maybe they shouldn't, because I think maybe it's a little unnecessary. There are other things. I'm not going to be drawing any comparisons because I'm just not going to be drawing any comparisons. I'm just going to see how they fit in the movie, and that's really it. And part of the reason is also because of the villain for this one, because, well, I guess we should get back to that, shouldn't we? So Tony does go to the charity gala, and we get it, and we get our Stan Lee cameo as he's cameoed as Hugh Hefner, which is kind of nice. I think it's kind of amusing. And while there, he sees Pepper, who it turns out showed up to the party in a nice in this nice dress that Tony got her for her birthday, and by that I mean it was her birthday and she used his money to pay for it. So he meets her and they have a nice little dance, and it's a nice cute moment where they actually talk, and they're just it's just them nice and sharing, and they're getting a bit more intimate, though Pepper kind of though they kind of put a halt on it when Pepper starts getting a bit nervous, and that's because, well, she's worked with Tony for years at this point, so them just starting to get more intimate is a bit of a no-no. As such, they go out into the terrace, and while there is almost a moment they stop themselves, and Pepper thinks that she kind of wants a drink, and Tony goes inside to get drinks for them. However, while he's at the bar getting the drinks, the reporter from earlier, I think it's the same reporter. I don't know. I think it is. She comes up to Tony and starts kind of starts badgering him with some questions. And she then brings up that some of his weapons are still being used in the Middle East by the Ten Rings. However, which Tony knows nothing about until she hands him pictures of them using weapons from Stark Industries to attack this small town, including the Jericho missiles. And when Tony sees this, he realizes that something isn't right, because he didn't okay this. He didn't okay this sale, so he's wondering what the hell's going on. He goes outside to try and question Obadiah about this, thinking that he might know know something about this. But Obadiah keeps telling him to just calm down, and then he just does not worry about it. And he gets him in in front of some reporters, and they take pictures. And then Stain whispers to Tony that he was the one that wanted to have him blocked. He said it was for his own good, but it makes you realize that something is a bit off with him, though you kind of got that vibe. I kind of got that vibe from him in the first place. So, as such, that night Tony watches the news broadcast about what the Ten Rings are doing, and he decides that he's got to do something. As such, he goes down to his lab, and with his new suit built, he suits up in full Iron Man regalia, and it is so cool to actually see him now in the actual Iron Man suit and getting ready to just kick ass and be a superhero. And I kind of realized that if you don't count him in the proto suit, we'll say this is him this is his first outing as Iron Man in the movie, and it's halfway through. But what makes it better is that it doesn't feel like your time was wasted getting to this point, because you still got plenty of action and good storytelling up to here. And again, even if you don't want to count it, you still had the kick-ass moment earlier, because while it may be a proto-Iron Man, it was still technically Iron Man, and that is so cool. But to actually see the full suit made, to see him flying around now and getting ready to go kick ass, it's really cool, and it does pay off, as he goes out to the town that the Ten Rings are still raiding with all these weapons as they're going after civilians, having women and children sent off while the men stay behind to either use as labor or just to be shot. And just as they're about to kill a guy who is trying to reunite with his son, Iron Man, he comes right in and just slams right down a superhero, and he doesn't waste time. He just starts blasting everybody. Any terrorists that are using civilians as shields, he's able to knock them out with little missiles or bullet or just rubber bullets or anything that just not or just something. And even the guy that's the head of this, who was the guy that initially met Tony in the beginning when he was captured, he managed to make him pretty much defenseless and at the mercy of all the civilians. He just and I love it too. Like, he was hiding behind a pillar, he was trying to call his boss, and then Tony just grabs him, pulls him through a wall, throws him to the ground, and then just tells everyone he's all yours, and then flies away. It is such a kick-ass moment, and it's really fun. As such, and it gets even better when he goes off to find the Jericho missiles. And at first while he's flying there, he gets shot down by a tank. And his response to that, he gets up and then shoots the tank with a little missile and then walks away as the tank just blows up. It is so cool. And so as such, he flies to where the Jericho missiles are and then just blows them up, probably killing all the terrorists, and flies off. But as he's flying away, he gets the attention of the military, of which specifically the Air Force, of which Rhodey is a member. And I forgot to mention this earlier. Early on in the film, while Tony was still recuperating and was getting ready to build the Iron Man suit, he wanted Rhodey to come help him, but Rhodey declined because he thought Tony just wasn't in his right mind because he was held captive for 3 months and now he needed to get back, and he still needed to get back into things. So Rhodey is there, and they pick up Tony and flying through, and they have no idea who he's aligned with, because for all they know, it's an unmanned drone or just some kind of thing, just some weapon. And as such, they assume that whatever this thing is, if they don't know what it is, then it's hostile. Since they send out 2 fighter jets to try and head it off or take care of it, and so Tony starts flying around Tony just starts flying around, trying to shake them off. Rhodey calls Tony and asks him if he has anything flying out there, and Tony tries playing dumb, saying that he's going jogging or driving around, but he mixes up both stories. But things get thrown for a loop when they actually do manage to when one of the jets managed to hit Tony, and he has to hide. As such, Tony calls Rhodey back and tells him that it's him. Rhodey initially thinks that it's one of his weapons, and he starts chastising him. And so Tony says, "No, it's me. It's me. It's a suit, and I'm in it." And so when Rhodey hears this, his reaction is just, "Holy crap!" At that point, though, the other jet pilot and one of them sees Tony on the other side of the other, and they manage to shake him off. But unfortunately, when it shakes him off, it winds up throwing him right into the line of the other jet, causing the thing to crash and the guy to have to eject. Unfortunately, the guy's chute is not working, so Tony has to has to fly down and stop it. Now, the guy in charge of everything tries saying that if the other guy gets the shot, he needs to take it, but Rhodey tries talking him down, though his argument is that thing took down a jet. That thing took down one of our jets with a little effort. If we have the shot, we need to take it. But they eventually stop when Tony manages to smack the guy's chute out of him and save his life, so allowing him to escape. As such, to cover the incident up, they say it was just a training exercise, and that they don't know who was responsible for blowing up the terrorist cell there. But Stain is watching this broadcast at home, and he gets suspicious. As such, later on, the Ten Rings are back at their base camp with the guy who's in charge, still overseeing everything, and we only see 2 limos come driving in, and of course, it turns out that they're actually in league with Obadiah Stane, who, it turns out, was the one that initially put the hit out on Tony. It turns out that when Tony was captured, he initially wanted Tony to be killed, not captured. But when the Ten Rings found out that the guy they were ordered to kill was Tony Stark, they thought that they had been betrayed and wanted a higher payment because it's Tony Stark. He's the builder of all the weapons that they use. Odds are he's very valuable to them. So I'm guessing that maybe they wouldn't let him go even if he developed the Jericho. I doubt they would kill him because, as Stain puts it later, he's the golden goose. So having him there was probably a very big deal for them. But they're not going to talk about that. Instead, they direct him to the Mark I Iron Man suit. They direct Stain to the Mark I, and so Stain When there, he sees it, and he sees it, and the head of and the guy who's in charge of the Ten Rings tells him that, I'll tell you what, I'm gonna give you this, but in return, I want you to mass produce it for me and my guys, so we can have an army, so that we can have an army of Iron Soldiers. And Stane's response is that he uses this weird sonic thing that, when heard by anybody, when heard by people, it pretty much shuts down their motor functions and puts them in paralyzes them for 15 minutes. People, you can be exempt from it if you wear earplugs, which Stain was wearing, but pretty much he takes it. Pretty much he pretty much just renders him a non-threat, and Stain orders all of his, so Stain orders his men to take the suit and pretty much just kill everyone there. So in the meantime, Pepper goes down to Tony's lab and sees him taking off the suit, catches him taking off the suit, and realizes what he's doing. But later on, Tony asks Pepper that Tony tells Pepper that she needs to go to Stark Industries and use a ghost drive to take files out, to get some files from there, to get some files, because he doesn't know it's Stain yet, but he knows that someone was selling to the Ten Rings, and I think I might have just mentioned it before, but yeah, it was Stain. He was the guy doing all this. And so he wants Pepper to go in and do that. But Pepper doesn't want anything to do with this because she knows that if Tony keeps this up, he'll probably get killed. But Tony's response is, you stood by me while I engineered the deaths of thousands. Now that I'm trying to make it right, you're just leaving me. And he does manage to get through to her saying, I just want to make this right. I want to do right. And so Pepper decides to do what he asks and takes the ghost drive to Stark Industries, where she goes to Stain's personal computer and finds all of his files for all the weapons he's been selling, and on top of that, new files for his own suit, as he took the suit and decided to make his own faction, and decided to make his own little section in Stark Industries in Sector 16, so that he can make his own. Though from the blueprints, it looks a bit bigger and more muscular than before. And on top of that, we even see the video that was being filmed at the beginning of the movie on his desktop. So yeah, it pretty much, if it wasn't confirmed before, it's confirmed now. Pepper now knows that he's the bad guy, but unfortunately at that point, Stain comes into the office, and so she manages to keep him talking enough so that he doesn't know what he's doing, even switching the computer to screensaver mode, so she doesn't see all the files that are being put onto the ghost drive. Excuse me. And so once they got all the files, she manages to grab the ghost drive with a paper, and tries escaping, though Stain asks for the paper back, which she does, though still hiding the drive. But at that point, when Stain goes to his computer, he finds that all of his files have been copied, and he knows that Pepper was the one responsible. However, before he can head her off, as Pepper's leaving the building, she runs into Agent Phil Coulson, and I neglected to mention him because because after Tony Stark came back from Afghanistan, he's been popping up. He is an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., and I know they keep saying it, they call it whatever, they call it with an official name or the whole movie up until the end, but S.H.I.E.L.D. is better, it rolls off the tongue, and even they know it, and even they were aware that it was a mouthful. But pretty much after Tony's come back, Coulson has been trying to brief Tony on what happened over there, that happened over in Afghanistan, and what they were doing, etc. But pretty much he's never had an opportunity. So he manages to head off Pepper outside the office in hopes of ambushing her to finally get the interview. But Pepper sees a golden opportunity as she says, "Yep, interviews. Yep, we can have the interview. Come with me right now." And so they both leave the building while Stain watches. In the meantime, Stain knows he got to deal with them, he tries to get moving forward with his suit project, and so he goes to a scientist and tries to see how they're going with the power source, but unfortunately none of the scientists know how to reduce the arc reactor into the small little chess piece that Tony used. As such, Stain realizes that if he wants a power source, he's got to go directly to the source. He's got to go directly to Stark, which he immediately does as he goes to Tony's home without tripping security, which is kind of odd, but at the same time, you can make the argument that Tony sees him as a friend, so Jarvis wouldn't register him as a threat, so you could probably just walk right in and Jarvis wouldn't do anything. But to which he uses that sonic thing to paralyze Tony, and then take out the arc reactor in his chest. After that, he leaves, just leaving Tony there as he's going into cardiac arrest. And in the meantime, Pepper calls Rhodey and tells him that what Stane's doing. And they don't really explain why Stane wants Tony dead, though. If you ask me, it was just, I think the motivation was that he wanted his company back, because Obadiah Stane. Because, yeah, like I said, he was the guy in charge of Stark Industries after Tony's parents died. And so to have this young, brash, egotistical dick to come in and take all of his hard work for his own and just continually sully his good name, from a twisted mindset, it kind of makes sense. On top of that, he was selling technology to terrorists, so I don't think he wanted Tony to find out about that. So odds are he wanted to not get rid of him before he found out. So I don't know. But anyway, so Rhodey goes to check on. So Pepper sends Rhodey to go check on Tony, while Pepper, Coulson, and a few other S.H.I.E.L.D. agents are going back to Stark Industries to arrest Stane for what he's done. But in the meantime, Tony, now free of the paralysis, tries hobbling down to his lab to get the Mark I chess piece, because he's going into cardiac arrest and he needs to get to Stane before he finishes his suit. And while he almost does not make it to the piece, thankfully, the robotic arm that continually shut the fire extinguisher, that kept dousing him with its fire extinguisher, manages to save him and get him his chess piece, allowing Rhodey to find Tony as he's kind of getting back up to 100%. As such, Pepper, Coulson, and the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents manage to get to Stark Industries and blow a lock to Stane's lab. But by that point, Stane has already put the second arc reactor in his gargantuan suit, and when he hears the explosion on the door being opened up, he decides that it's time they need to step up, as he jumps into the suit as they come in. And while they initially find the Mark I Iron Man suit, they can't find Stane, but Pepper eventually does find him in his Ironmonger suit. And I know he's called the Ironmonger because they say it at one point, and I got a toy, one from Burger King, that said it once. But yeah, he's now the Ironmonger, and if you expect me to, and again, not making comparisons to the comic, this is another major reason why I'm not going to make any major comparisons to the comic when it comes to certain villains. Because, as I said before, prior to this movie, I knew nothing about certain villains. There are some villains I knew by name, but I didn't know their backstory, and Obadiah Stane in the comics was not a partner of Tony Stark. He was a business rival, but I honestly don't care. Some of these villains I know, some of them I don't. Some of them I know their original backstory. Some I'm just blind to. And Obadiah Stane is one. And Obadiah Stane, aka the Ironmonger, is one of those characters. So I really have nothing to say about what the changes they made to him here, or whatever they've done. I'm just here to see the guy in the giant suit try to kill Pepper Potts, which is exactly what happens. As Stane immediately gets up in his Ironmonger suit and just tries to kill Pepper, and she runs off. And something I find kind of funny is that the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents open fire on him, which I think is a pretty stupid move, as even in the Mark I Iron Man suit, the bullets did jack, and yet they thought they could shoot at him instead of just running away, even though they know they're probably screwed. But yeah, Stane chases Pepper out of the building, while back at Stark Mansion he manages to suit up, and he tells Rhodey that he wants him to keep the skies clear so that no one will shoot him down. While Rhodey's willing to do that, he briefly considers putting on the original suit that he used for his testing, but decides he'll do it next time. And as such, he goes to the Air Force and tells them that it's just a training exercise. But in the meantime, Tony manages to fly to Stark Industries, though Jarvis tells him that the mini arc reactor is not going to be enough to support the suit, and they're already at 48% power with all the 48% power and dropping because of the flying. But Tony manages to make it there in time, just as Stane is about to kill Pepper Potts, and they get into this giant fight in the streets, and it's just a big brawl. And I know that you can probably say that the climax kind of sucks, but I don't think that. It's not great, but it is still really cool to see these two metal men just duking it out in the street. Just things being blown up, just cars being blown up and being thrown, things being blasted, missiles going everywhere. It's just, I actually think it's really cool. Though, at the same time, it's clear that Stane's armor is better than Tony's, as he's got a better, or at the very least, Tony's still at a disadvantage, because his arc reactor is just not as powerful as the one in Stane's armor. As such, it becomes a pretty one-sided fight for the most part, as while Tony's able to get in a few good hits, Stane's clearly got him outmatched, to the point where he manages to blast him into a bus and nearly kills him. But Tony manages to make an escape and tries flying away, though Stane has his own propulsion system on his suit and chases after him. Though this is actually Tony's plan, as he flies him high enough into the air so that they encounter the same problem that Tony did. Though thankfully, since Tony already dealt with this problem and managed to fix it in the new set of armor, he's not affected by the freezing, while the Ironmonger armor is, and allows Tony to break free from Stane and fly away while Stane falls to the earth. Unfortunately, though, that doesn't mean he's out for the count either, as Stane manages to recover quickly and still chases after Tony as he lands on top of where they're keeping the arc reactor. And unfortunately, because of all the power they wasted just flying around in the battle, Tony's now an emergency power. He can't do much now. He can't really do any more. He's pretty much on his last legs, while Stane is still perfectly fine and is still going nuts. And Stane even manages to grab Tony, though he's able to shoot off a bunch of flares and blind him enough so that he can escape. As such, Tony realizes that if they want to take care of him, they gotta ignite the arc. They've gotta overload the arc reactor and just fry the whole roof with Stane on it. While Pepper thinks it's a bad idea because it could still kill Tony, but he tells her to do it anyway, while he keeps Stane distracted, managing to rip out some cords in his armor to take out the target system and the heads-up display in his suit. And while he does, and so Pepper manages to put in enough coordinates to get the arc reactor to overload, but pretty much even with some of his components disabled, Stane is fine, while Tony is not even on his last legs anymore. He's running on fumes at this point. And so Stane tries to shoot him, but with his targeting system he keeps missing. And so Tony gives the order to Pepper to just ignite the arc reactor, and while she's initially hesitant to do it, he eventually managed to talk her into it, and it causes the reactor to just go nuts and send out an explosion that sends Tony flying to the side while frying Stane's armor. And while he may be dead at this point, because all we see of him after that is he's unconscious. The end result is that he falls forward down through the window they were on, right into the arc reactor, which in turn causes it to explode. And Pepper had already gotten out by that point, so if he wasn't dead before, he's dead. He's now dead, while Tony is still clinging to life. But at the end of the day, the bad guy lost, the hero is alive, and all is well. And so, at the end of the movie, we have a nice little requisite as Rhodey's giving an official statement about the whole thing, about the rumors that it was just that they don't know anything about it, there was just tests around, etc. While Tony's reading a newspaper that actually calls him Iron Man in there. And so Coulson meets up with Tony and gives him an official and gives him a cue card for his official statement about his official alibi, that he was somewhere else with a bunch of party guests, and that Stane died on a yacht and that Stane died in an accident on a yacht. And that part of the backstory is that Iron Man is Tony Stark's bodyguard, which is the excuse that they use in the comics and the cartoon. Though Tony thinks it's kind of dumb, but whatever. And so Coulson leaves while Tony and Pepper kind of have a nice moment where he does try to keep hitting on her, but eventually Tony has to go out and give an official statement to the press. Though when the lady here before starts questioning him and thinks that his whole backstory is that his whole alibi is a load of crap, Tony tries to deny it, but at the end of the day he realizes that. At the end of the day, he's about to say his speech, but then at the last minute he finally just stops and says, "Ladies and gentlemen, I am Iron Man," and it just causes the whole room to go into a riot as the credits roll. But there's still one more scene, and that's the scene that sets up everything. That sets up the rest of the universe as the last scene in the film is Tony coming home. But when he tries talking to Jarvis, Jarvis is mysteriously shut down. and he finds someone there, someone in shadows who tells him that you think you're the first superhero in the world. You just joined a universe much bigger than you can imagine. And so Tony asks who he is, and he comes out of the shadows and says his name is Nick Fury, director of Shield, and that he wants to talk to Tony about the Avengers Initiative. So, thoughts on this movie? I love it. Like, even after all these years, this is still a really kick-ass movie. Like, everything, like, let's go down the list. First off, I love the acting. Like, Gwyneth Paltrow, Robert Downey Jr., and, hold on, I'm gonna get this. Jeff Bridges, even Terrence Howard as Rhodey. They're all great actors, and they turn in amazing performances. They really sell these characters and the world they live in. I think it's really good, and I love how each of them plays it. Like, Jeff Bridges as Obadiah Stane is clearly slime, and you can see that there's something going on beneath the surface. But Jeff Bridges plays him so approachable. Like, this is a guy that you could go clubbing with. Like, even when you know, like, he seems so friendly and nice that even if you know he's doing evil, you could still hold a conversation with him. And even when he's threatening it, and even if he's threatening you, you could still probably still hold something civil. You can probably still talk civilly to him. Like, this is the type of guy that can talk you into anything type of deal. And that's the kind of character he plays it as, and I like that. I love Gwyneth Paltrow as Pepper, I love how, because she plays it like she definitely plays it up great, she definitely plays it up really well for being this secretary who is aware of her boss's less than stellar attitude, but work is work, so she'll do whatever she wants, so she'll do whatever she can. And at the same time, Tony clearly appreciates having her around, even if he is a dick. So, but Tony doesn't actually start seeing her as more than just Tony doesn't see her as more than just a secretary until after he has his moment, until after he's captured by the Ten Rings and realizes that he is a massive dick who has been hurting people. And she's constantly been by his side and put up with all his crap, and he starts appreciating her more. And I like that. I love how she plays it. It's really good. And Robert Downey Jr. was perfect for this role. He was born to play Iron Man. Because he hits every note right. The arrogance, the ego, just the fast talking, the quips, the humor, everything, even the humanity. All of that is perfectly portrayed in this movie. And it is great. And another thing I could know about the performances, they all feel real. Like, even the most cartoony ones, I think, have some bit of realism to them, at least in the main cast. Because all of them feel like real people when they talk, and I think it's just how they play it. They talk like regular people, like they're holding regular conversations. Like, they talk over each other at certain points. They try to get to certain things. There's some moments where you feel like that they don't know what they're trying to say, but they're trying to get it out there, and that's kind of because it's kind of because that's kind of what was happening on set. A little interesting tidbit about Iron Man is that the final script wasn't ready when they started filming. They had the outlines of where they had the outline, but they didn't have a full script when they started shooting. They knew where they wanted to go, but some scenes and some lines were not written when the film was shooting, and they were kind of rushed when they made the movie. And they didn't have much for their budget in this case, so they kind of had to use whatever they got. And I think it just shows to how good the actors are when they are able to actually ad-lib these lines and still convince you of the characters and what they do and what they're doing in the scene. It's actually it's so well done, and I love it. It's just really great. And the second thing, the story. As I mentioned before, we don't get Iron Man going out and actually fighting bad guys until halfway through the movie. If you're not counting the first one, and I kind of count that as and I guess you could count that, but halfway through the movie is when we actually get him in the Iron Man garb that you all know. But even before that, the rest of the film holds up really well. The pacing, I think, is really great and does really well the transitions and getting all the characters in place. We get from one. It does flow well from one scene to the next, and the story does not feel rushed in any area. In fact, when Tony finally does dress up in the Iron Man in the red and yellow Iron Man suit and goes to fight the Ten Rings, it feels like it feels like it's at the right time for that. Like, just seeing him going out there and just kicking ass, especially these awful people that they kind of try to make resemble real life. And so, in a way, it kind of feels cathartic because you actually have a superhero going in and just beating the shit out of these awful human beings. And it is so glorious and so cathartic to watch. I love it. It is just amazing, and I love it. And especially... And on top of that, and I think what makes, and even just kind of how it flows, even when, and I'll say this now at least, while I love how Obadiah is portrayed, he is pretty much just a businessman, just a corrupt businessman who wants to indulge in more illegal activities. But while that is kind of played out even in the context of the story, again, I'm not gonna diss Jeff Bridges' performance here. It is still very good, and I like how he plays. I love how he plays the Ironmonger. But the rest of the story is really nice in terms of the arc that Tony goes through, how it progresses, and when it comes to the climax. I think that's great, and I love it. I love how it's shot. And I love the action. It is so great, and I love how they kind of build up to it. Like, you see every little tidbit. We don't see every tidbit, but you see how Tony is building all this stuff. You see more of how his intellect is coming into play when he builds it, and just kind of seeing it all come together, and just seeing him curb stomp. Even when the Ironmonger is getting the best of him, it's just so fun to watch, seeing them flying around, using all this technology to their advantage. It's just really fun. And speaking of fun, I love the humor. This film is funny. Like, it's not like I got all my sides funny, but it's got really good comedic timing and just some good jokes. Like, two examples I can think of for jokes. Well, one example. I wrote the other one down. But the first example I can think of is a scene between Tony and Rhodey while they're on their way to Afghanistan. When they're trying to hold, like, Rhodey's trying to hold a regular conversation with Tony and trying to keep him business oriented, but Tony, being Tony, is just blowing him off and wants to have a drink, and even tries pouring Rhodey one. And Rhodey said, "No, I'm not gonna have that drink. I'm not gonna have that drink." And immediately just cuts them both plastered off their asses as rave music is playing over the plane, and Rhodey is just trying to tell Tony about all the crap that he puts him through, while in the foreground are these three exotic dancers just dancing around as a pole comes out of the floor that one starts spinning around on. It's just kind of nice. And then another scene I can think of is the one with Pepper helping Tony replace the mini arc reactor in his chest as she goes in to try and take it out, and she just starts getting disgusted because it's full of all this weird pus, and she just starts freaking out, and immediately things start going wrong as she tries pulling it out, as she just pulls it out and snaps it, just to go to pull out a wire, and suddenly he starts going to cardiac arrest because she pulled out something essential. I love it. It's just really nice, and I like that, and that's the film the film has that kind of, and the film has that stuff throughout. Like, the jokes come from either Tony's attitude, even after his character shift, to just little stupid things like that. Like, I love, like, Coulson trying to play it up as a strong government agent while he still kind of keeps getting brushed off. Like, he keeps going to people and saying, "I'd like to have a word with Mr. Stark about what he went through." It's like, "Yeah, we'll schedule you in." He tries talking to Tony. Tony blows him off, and then he tries ambushing Pepper out, but she's already in the middle of something else. So she's like, "Okay, come with me." It's like, "Okay." It's just kind of nice, and I like that, and there's a reason I like Coulson. There's a reason why people like this guy and why he got it, and why he was able to get into the spin-off show. It's nice, but. And it's just got that nice little bit of energy, and it's clear that this film is not trying to be like this big serious thing. It is trying to be a fun comic book movie, and that's what it is. It has good character, like the acting is great, the action is so fun. seeing these characters duking it out, making quipping, and just kind of kicking ass while still kind of keeping up its tone. I think it's really well done and well paced, and just is so it's just so fun to watch that you can't help but kind of enjoy it. And again, it also comes from the characters because how they're played makes them feel real, like they're real people. And it kind of helps that again. Sorry, that the script wasn't fully finished by the time the film was started, so it makes sense that they would do stuff like this. And I like it. It really works. But at the same time, though, I guess if you could, but at the same time, the film is not perfect. It's great, but there are a couple of minor flaws that I point out. Like I mentioned before, how Stain, despite I like Jeff Bridges' performance, at the end of the day, is just kind of a eh. Is just kind of well, how they do him is just that he's a businessman villain. And while I personally don't have a big problem with the climax, I understand why a lot of people do, and admittedly, it is kind of basically just hero versus stronger version of themselves, and admittedly, it kind of fits into some of that the last minute climax stuff that some films did, like where the big bad is being built up throughout the movie, but they don't actually become the supervillain until like the last minute or so, and then they get offed. Like they did that in Hulk. They kind of did it in the first Fantastic Four movie. So it is a little lame that you have Stain throughout this whole movie being built up, but then you don't see him in his supervillain garb till the end of the film, and even then he's still just a evil businessman type of deal. So it's not I can understand why, but I think that's really a big problem there, and I think that's kind of the biggest problem. And I suppose you could say that some things are that maybe sometimes the humor feels a bit weird, but honestly, I would still say that fits into the mold because because they do want you to care enough about these characters to want to see them to see because they do want you to still care about these characters, so they can't really keep joking about it. But the jokes and quips are there to remind you that this is still a comic movie and you're supposed to be having fun. So I think that works, but at the same, but I think again, I think that's really the film's biggest problem. The problem I think the biggest problem is the villain, and again, I don't hate him. Jeff Bridges plays it really well. But at the end of the day, he really is just a generic businessman he really is just a generic businessman that wants to get rich off by selling weapons to terrorists. And even at the end, the only reason he put on the Ironmonger suit was so that he could fend off the Shield agents and take care of Pepper. So I would admit he is the weakest aspect of the movie. Not awful, but definitely the weakest part of the movie. But with all that said, I think this film still holds up really well. Even after all these years, it's still a really kick-ass movie. And at the end of the day, I think that's what helped spark the universe. Like, problems that you can see with films that are trying to start whole cinematic universes now is that they're trying to put in too much with too little. Like, they're so concerned with trying to make a cinematic crossover universe that they keep throwing in hints and elements that say, oh, this should be built up in a sequel. This is going to be built up in a sequel. Yada, 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 blah, blah, blah. But this film, it doesn't feel like that. Like, there are certain elements that you think will be expanded upon later, like with the Shield thing. That's, like, you think, they reveal just enough of that so you'll want to see more about them in a sequel. But the film, for the most part, is contained in its own story. They hint that there's going to be sequels, because, again, the Shield and Rhodey saying that he'll wear the suit, that he'll get the suit next time. They hint enough at that, but otherwise there is no greater connection to making a universe until the after credits scene with Nick Fury. That's all. And that's part of what makes the movie great. It doesn't feel like it's trying to build a big cinematic universe. It's just trying to be a fun superhero movie. And I think that should be I think that's ultimately the biggest problem with other films. That's not their big concern. There's a reason why people loved Wonder Woman, yet trashed Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, and Suicide Squad. Though I personally liked Man of Steel and Suicide Squad, but that's just me, and I can understand why people don't like them. But there's a reason why people liked it. It's because it was self-contained. It was just trying to be a fun superhero movie, and that's what Iron Man is. It's not trying to be even though it is the starting point for this entire universe. Its primary focus is trying to be entertaining. Is trying to be a movie first, and a start second. That's all it's trying to be. It needs to start small, with something large. And at the end of the day, I think it succeeded in spades, and I think it's still a really kick-ass movie. So I think that's really all I can say. At the end of the day, I think the first Iron Man movie is just a great movie. I love the acting, I love the action, I love the characters, I love the plot. The only weak aspect is the villain, and even then, I don't think he's awful. I just think he's not as strong in comparison to the rest of the film. And as the starting point for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it's great. It doesn't it sets up a self-contained story without going nuts about its relation to the rest of the Marvel Universe. And at the end of the day, I think is just a really fun, kick-ass movie. So, yeah. That's all I can say there. Thank you for watching. I'm Samuel Johnson, and tune in next week as we get introduced to the second Avenger to appear in the Marvel Cinematic Universe with the great green Goliath himself, the Incredible Hulk.